The distress signal, the Serenity Accord, had maintained peace across 17 star systems for 3,000 years. Inside the crystalline halls of the Galactic Council, representatives from dozens of species worked together in harmony. They had solved hunger, eliminated disease, and created technologies that bent space and time. Yet on this particular day, something happened that would change everything they believed about survival and strength. Coordinator Thessa floated in her aquatic sphere, tentacles dancing through the nutrient-rich fluid as she reviewed the morning's communications. The Jelani were an ancient species, evolved in the deep oceans of their homeworld where pressure would crush most life forms. They served as the Council's primary communication specialists, their neural networks capable of processing thousands of signals simultaneously. But the signal that appeared on her screens at precisely midday was unlike anything she had encountered in her 4 centuries of service. The transmission came from the outer rim, beyond the borders of civilized space. It pulsed with mathematical precision, using prime numbers and universal constants to establish intelligence. But beneath the careful structure was something else entirely. Desperation. Pure, unfiltered terror encoded in electromagnetic waves. Thessa's translucent body flashed deep purple, the Jelani expression of alarm. As she decoded the message layer by layer, High Chancellor Korvax arrived within minutes, his crystalline exoskeleton clicking against the polished floor. The Shard were the Council's appointed leaders, chosen for their logical thinking and inability to feel fear. Yet even Korvax paused when he saw what the message contained. Visual data streamed across the displays, showing entire star systems going dark, planets stripped of atmosphere, space stations torn apart at the molecular level, and at the center of it all, a force that defied their understanding of physics and biology. The message came from the Etherian Collective, a peaceful federation of energy-based life forms who existed in the space between dimensions. They had never asked for help before. They had never needed it. Their technology was so advanced that most Council species considered them nearly godlike. But now they were dying, their dimensional barriers failing, their population decimated from billions to mere thousands in the span of weeks. The enemy they faced was something they called the Void Hunters, entities that existed outside normal space-time and fed on consciousness itself. Korvax assembled the Emergency Council within the hour. Representatives from every member species gathered in the Great Chamber, their forms a testament to the diversity of evolution. Gaseous beings from the methane worlds of Titan 7, silicon-based creatures who thrived in temperatures that would vaporize carbon, hive minds that spoke with 1,000 voices. Yet as they reviewed the data from the Etherian Collective, a terrible realization spread through the room. None of them knew how to fight this enemy. Their weapons were designed for conventional warfare. Their defenses protected against physical threats. The Void Hunters existed beyond such limitations. It was Ambassador Urix who spoke the unthinkable suggestion. The insectoid diplomat's compound eyes reflected the horror on every face as she activated a star chart showing a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. Earth. The Death World. The planet every Council species had agreed to quarantine until its inhabitants either destroyed themselves or evolved beyond their violent nature. Humans had achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago, and the Council had voted unanimously to maintain distance. They were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too willing to destroy themselves and everything around them. But Urix had studied human history extensively. She knew what others refused to acknowledge. Humans had not just survived on a world that should have killed them. They had conquered it. They had taken a planet with predators, diseases, natural disasters, and scarce resources, and they had become the apex species through sheer determination and adaptability. Where other species evolved in paradise and developed technology for exploration and art, humans had evolved in hell and developed technology for war. The debate raged for hours. Some argued it was better to die with dignity than unleash humanity on the galaxy. Others pointed out that humans might side with the Void Hunters or worse, learn to control them. But as another star system went dark on their monitors, as the Etherian Collective's numbers dropped below 1,000, the choice became clear. They would send a message to Earth. They would ask the monsters of the Death World to save them from an even greater monster. The message was carefully crafted to appeal to human psychology. Urix knew humans responded strongly to calls for help, especially when innocent lives were at stake. She included data about the peaceful species being destroyed, the children who would never grow up, the civilizations that would be lost forever. She also included something else, something that would speak to the human ego. She called them by the name they had earned but never heard. Deathworlders, the ones who thrived where others perished. On Earth, the message arrived at the Mars Communication Array at 3:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was halfway through her coffee when every screen in the facility lit up simultaneously. The automatic translation protocols, developed for potential first contact scenarios, began processing the alien mathematics into human language. Within minutes, Chen was on a secure line to Space Command. Within an hour, the President and the Joint Chiefs were assembled. Within 6 hours, humanity made a decision that would define their place in galactic history. Admiral Marcus Stone stood before the assembled fleet at the Neptune staging ground. 500 ships representing every nation on Earth floated in perfect formation. These were not the exploration vessels other species built. These were instruments of war, refined through centuries of human conflict. Battleships armed with nuclear weapons and railguns, carriers filled with fighters designed for maximum destruction, stealth vessels that could slip through space undetected, and at the center of it all, the crown jewel of human military engineering, the dreadnought Prometheus, a ship so heavily armed that its own designers had questioned whether it was excessive. Stone's voice carried across the communication network to every ship, every soldier, every human who had volunteered for this mission. The galaxy had called them monsters, killers, deathworlders. Today they would show the galaxy that sometimes monsters were exactly what you needed. The fleet engaged their jump drives simultaneously, tearing holes in space-time with a violence that made nearby monitoring stations recoil. They were not just traveling to save the Etherian collective. They were traveling to prove that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their ships, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat. As the human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind only radiation and twisted space, the Galactic Council held its breath. They had called upon the demons of the Death World. Now they would discover whether those demons would be their salvation or their doom. The Void Hunters had never faced an enemy like humanity. They fed on fear and consciousness, but humans had a peculiar trait. When faced with incomprehensible horror, when confronted with certain death, when logic dictated surrender, humans did something no other species did. They got angry, and angry humans had a long history of killing things that seemed unkillable. The journey to the Outer Rim would take 4 days. 4 days for humanity to prepare for a war against an enemy that existed outside the laws of physics. 4 days for the galaxy to wonder if they had made the right choice. 4 days before the children of Earth would show the universe why evolution on a death world created the perfect warriors for an impossible war. The Deathworlder Solution. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Etherian collective's territory, and immediately, every human aboard every ship understood why the aliens were terrified. Space itself was wrong here. Reality bent and twisted in ways that made the brain refuse to process what the eyes were seeing. Where stars should have been, there were holes in existence itself. Not black holes that consumed light, but something worse. Voids that consumed the very concept of being. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching his instruments fail one by one. Traditional sensors could not read what was not there. Weapons targeting systems could not lock onto enemies that existed between dimensions. His crew, hardened veterans of the Martian Rebellion and the Europa conflict, looked to him for orders. Stone did something that no alien commander would have done. He smiled. Humans had been fighting enemies they could not see, could not understand, and could not defeat by conventional means since the dawn of their species. They called it Tuesday. Dr. James Wright, the fleet's chief scientist and a man who had spent his career studying theoretical physics, was the first to understand what they were facing. The Void Hunters were not creatures in any conventional sense. They were entropy given consciousness, feeding on the organized energy of living minds. They existed in the spaces between spaces. The gaps in reality that quantum mechanics suggested but could not define. To fight them with conventional weapons would be like trying to punch a shadow. But Wright had not earned his reputation by thinking conventionally. The Etherian collective's survivors had gathered on a massive station that phased in and out of normal space. Their last defense against the Void Hunters. When the human fleet arrived, Ambassador Luminara, speaking for her dying people, materialized on the Prometheus bridge. She was beautiful in an alien way, a being of pure energy contained in a humanoid form only for the convenience of communication. Her voice resonated with harmonics that human ears could barely process as she explained the hopelessness of their situation. The Void Hunters could not be fought, only fled from. They had tried everything. Stone's response was characteristically human. He asked Luminara a simple question that no council species had thought to ask. If the Void Hunters fed on consciousness and existed between dimensions, what happened if you poisoned the food supply? The question made no sense to Luminara. How could consciousness be poisoned? Stone called in Major Diana Foster, head of the fleet's psychological warfare division. Foster had spent her career developing ways to weaponize the human mind against enemies. Now she would weaponize it against entropy itself. The plan was insane by any standard of military strategy. Instead of trying to hide their consciousness from the Void Hunters, the humans would broadcast it as loudly as possible. But they would not broadcast fear or order or any of the organized thoughts the entities fed upon. They would broadcast chaos. Pure, undiluted human chaos. Every traumatic memory, every nightmare, every moment of rage and insanity that humanity had accumulated over millions of years of evolution. They would turn their greatest weakness, their violent and chaotic nature, into a weapon. The fleet spread out in a formation that looked like suicide to the watching Etherians. Ships positioned themselves at the points where reality was weakest, where the Void Hunters were most likely to emerge. Then, using technology reverse-engineered from captured telepathic species during humanity's early space conflicts, they began to broadcast, not just thoughts, but the raw, unfiltered experience of being human, the terror of being hunted by predators on the ancient African plains, the rage of watching loved ones die to disease, the madness of war where humans had learned to embrace death rather than fear it. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Void Hunters, drawn to what seemed like a feast of consciousness, emerged from their dimensional hiding places. They were magnificent and terrible, existing in states that violated every law of physics. They reached out with tendrils of pure entropy, ready to consume the human minds. Then they touched the broadcast and recoiled. For the first time in their existence, they encountered something that hurt them. Human consciousness was not just chaotic. It was militarized chaos, weaponized insanity, controlled destruction. Captain Rodriguez of the destroyer Havoc described it best in his log. The Void Hunters fed on fear, but humans had learned to transform fear into anger. They fed on consciousness, but human consciousness included the ability to think about not thinking, to imagine non-existence while existing. It was a paradox that entities of pure entropy could not process. Like a computer virus designed to crash systems, human thought patterns began to destabilize the Void Hunters' very existence. But the humans were not content to simply repel the enemy. Commander Lisa Park, leading a squadron of fighter pilots, did something that epitomized human warfare. She flew her fighter directly into one of the larger Void Hunters, broadcasting not just chaotic thoughts but a very specific human concept: spite, the pure, crystallized human emotion of being willing to die just to ensure your enemy died with you. The Void Hunter tried to consume her consciousness, but found itself consuming the concept of mutual annihilation. Park ejected at the last second, but the damage was done. The entity collapsed in on itself, its existence nullified by paradox. Across the battlefield, humans employed tactics that no sane species would consider. Ships deliberately allowed themselves to be partially consumed, only to detonate nuclear weapons that existed simultaneously in normal space and the dimensional gaps. Soldiers in EVA suits threw themselves into the void, broadcasting their death experiences as weapons. The medical ships worked overtime, resuscitating those who could be saved, but everyone understood the cost. Humanity was literally using their ability to die and come back as a tactical advantage. The turning point came when Private Michael Thompson, a young soldier on his first deployment, discovered something by accident. While trying to save a wounded Etherian, he projected not chaos but another uniquely human trait: hope in the face of certain death, defiant optimism despite impossible odds, the determination to believe things would get better even when all evidence suggested otherwise. This impossible contradiction, hope existing alongside despair, created a resonance that did not just repel the Void Hunters, but began to unravel them at a fundamental level. Admiral Stone, recognizing the discovery, ordered all ships to recalibrate their broadcasts. Instead of pure chaos, they would broadcast the full spectrum of human experience. Joy and sorrow existing simultaneously, love and hate intertwined. The ability to laugh in the face of death and cry at beauty. The complete contradictory mess that was human consciousness. The effect was like antimatter meeting matter. The Void Hunters, beings of pure entropy, could not exist in the presence of such organized chaos, such structured disorder. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Void Hunters were not just defeated but erased from existence, their very concept nullified by human paradox. The cost was severe, 43 human ships lost, over 3,000 casualties. But they had done the impossible. They had defeated an enemy that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had declared unbeatable. The Etherian collective was saved, though reduced to barely 1,000 individuals. The Outer Rim was secure, though scarred in ways that would take centuries to heal. In the aftermath, as human medical teams worked alongside alien healers to save who they could, Ambassador Luminara asked Admiral Stone how humans had known their chaos would work as a weapon. Stone's answer would be recorded in the Galactic Council's archives as the moment everything changed. He said humans had not known it would work. They had simply refused to accept that it would not. That was what made them Deathworlders. Not their weapons or their ships or their willingness to die, but their absolute, illogical, impossible refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to lift the quarantine on Earth. Humanity was offered full membership. With a permanent seat on the Security Council, the title Deathworlder was officially changed from a warning to a badge of honor. Other species began to study human military tactics, trying to understand how a species could weaponize contradiction itself. But what they learned was that humanity's greatest weapon was not something that could be replicated. It was the result of millions of years of evolution on a planet that had tried to kill them every single day. As the human fleet prepared to return to Earth, they left behind more than just victory. They left behind a new understanding of strength. The galaxy had learned that sometimes to defeat the monsters in the dark, you needed bigger monsters. And sometimes those monsters looked like ordinary humans who had simply learned to thrive in chaos. The children of Earth had answered the call for help, and in doing so had shown the universe that being a Deathworlder was not about being the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. It was about being too stubborn to know when you were supposed to lose.